This week's episode is part one of a two-part series about the 5 spirits within Chinese medicine. So in Chinese medicine, you can't separate. You can't separate the mind from the body, from the spirit, from the emotions. It's all interconnected here. And honestly, that is why this medicine is so effective and able to treat anything you could possibly imagine. So learning about and working with the spirits within Chinese medicine is just another one of the many ways that we can improve our health and remember why we came here and find fulfillment and liberation within this life. So on this episode, I dive into the spirit of the heart, which is the Shen, also known as the fire spirit, the spirit of the liver, which is known as the Hun, also known as the wood spirit or our ethereal soul, and then the spirit of we call it the spleen, the stomach, the digestive system, the earth element, which is the Yi or the Yi. So on the show, I talk about what it looks like when these spirits are in harmony and when they are in disturbance or out of balance. I talk about the related emotions, the related characters or spirit guides, colors, spirits, all the things, some related points on the body to these spirits, and all the whispers in between. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. Hello, welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Solocast City. Welcome to the show if you're brand new. So when I look at my stats, you guys love my raw, friggin' bleeding heart, losing my shit solo casts, which I haven't done in a couple of months, I'd say. And it's because I've got a lot of moving parts happening, a lot of things up in the air, and I'm moving towards these things, but it's not happening till it's happened. So I hesitate to share personal life at the moment until it's concrete right in front of me. So we'll have this episode, and then I will be ending the season with an interview with my beautiful friend Jolie Trinidad, and then we'll be taking a break on the podcast until I usually start up again around Chinese New Year's, so around like March, like springtime. So if you're dying to know what makes me cry at night, no. The wisdom of this chapter, you're just going to have to stay tuned for that. Today, we are getting into the 5 spirits of Chinese medicine. I have been doing weeks of research on this, so I'm a little bit intimidated by the proverbial mountain of notes in front of me. This is something I learned in school, but so I'm trained in traditional Chinese medicine, also known as TCM. So to give you a little bit of a history, so Chinese medicine, it really has its roots in agricultural communities. It began with Qigong, which is the practice of cultivating qi. It's slow, steady movements. The farmers would watch the animals. And then through midwives as well, at least according to my research, they were also some of the first practitioners of the philosophy of of Chinese medicine. And then over time, it became more systematic in some degrees, but how it really was is it was pulled out of the hands of women and into the hands of men. Unfortunately, Confucius, who is like as sexist as it gets, was a huge piece of the Chinese medicine philosophy in the early centuries of medicine. So it was a very much a lineage sort of situation. Like, yes, women were actually, if you're interested in the women's side of history of Chinese medicine, I highly recommend you read the book Lady Tan's Circle of Women. But to digress here, Chinese medicine there was an apprentice and a master, and the master would often have multiple apprentices, and usually an apprentice would have a history within their family of practitioners. There's actually this quote from Lady Tan's Circle of Women of something along the lines of you should not trust a doctor who does not have multiple generations of doctors in their line. And then what happened was eventually communist China came around. And centuries later, communist China came in, and there's no religion, there's no spirituality in communism, right? So Chinese medicine is deeply, deeply spiritual. And the Chinese people are deeply spiritual. Confucius was not the only philosophy. It was Taoism that was pervasive within this medicine. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. And so the Communist Party of China, they did their very best to suppress Chinese medicine and to persecute anyone who practiced it. And then what happened is they realized, we can't provide centralized healthcare for all the people of China, and especially the communities living out in remote areas. So they were like, okay, what if we take Chinese medicine and we make it even more systematic, and we pull out the parts of it that we don't like, and then we'll reteach it to the masses. And then came this whole like modern TCM situation where there's universities and there's schools that are based off of this. So, in a way, like they really fucked up, right? They pulled out something that is so integral, and they couldn't pull it all the way out, right? Because here I am, the white Hispanic woman in America in 2025, about to talk to you about the spirits of Chinese medicine. So they really couldn't fully get rid of it because, some things can just never die in the history and the culture of humankind. But there are so a lot of this information, I learned some of it in school, some of the basics, but where there's this preservation of the spirits of Chinese medicine is in something called the 5-element theory. So there's a lot of 5-element practitioners out there. There's 5-element schools. I think the one that was unfortunately opened in Gainesville recently closed down. But yeah, they do not separate the spirit as much as TCM does. For me as well, just to give you a little bit of my background. So when I was in school, I got close to one of my teachers, Dr. Adamson, who became my mentor within he calls it medical Qigong, but I would say like within the spiritual aspect of Chinese medicine. So he taught me a lot of esoteric protocols. He taught me how to work with energy. And then, of course, I, being who I am, I took it and ran with it hard. And especially during my internship at school, that was just the spiritual aspect was such a deep, deep part of my practice. And it is still now, but I work at a clinic where, for now, this clinic, it's very fast moving. I don't really have time. If I'm going to have an esoteric aspect, a deep esoteric aspect within a session with a patient, I need time. It's not like a 45 minute situation that I have going now. So I don't really fully tap into it yet. I also still will do esoteric protocols. If somebody's open to it, I'll do spirit points. It's always, always going to be a part of my practice and the practice of Chinese medicine, whether somebody wants to admit to it or not. So I've alluded to the spirits of Chinese medicine many times on the podcast before. But the way that we see the soul, the spirit, is just, it's not at all in the typical way that you would in like a Judeo-Christian centered society. In Chinese medicine, there are 5 divisions of the spirit. 2 of them are ethereal in nature. They live on after we die. They are of the heavens, of the stars, of the celestial beings. And then we have one that's a pivot point, and which kind of brings the celestial aspects of the soul, they say, down the mountain to, it's like the pivot point to the human body or to the earth. And then we have 2 aspects of the spirit that are of the earth. A lens that is really useful to use while discussing the spirits of Chinese medicine is the 5-element theory. Each spirit has its own characteristic, its own season, its own trait, its own action, its own emotion, sound, color, organ pathway. So let's start there. We have fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And if you're unfamiliar with the 5 elements sequence of the generating sequence here. So if you look in the show notes, I'll have linked a photo of the 5 elements, and you're going to see that it's a fire, or it's fire pointing to earth, earth pointing to metal, metal pointing to water, water pointing to wood. Did I say that all right? Fire, earth, metal, water. Yeah, wood. And wood pointing to fire. So what this means is each of the elements influence one another. When they're in balance, they will flow in a clockwise direction. When they're out of balance, they will flow in a counterclockwise direction. There's so much more to that, but to keep it simple, we'll stop there. So the spirit of the fire is called the Shen. The spirit of the earth is called the Yi. The spirit of metal is called the Po. The spirit of the water is called the Zhi, or I call Zhi. I've heard other people use different names or like to pronounce it differently, so please forgive me if my pronunciation is atrocious. But we got the Zhi, and then the spirit of the wood element is the Hun. So I'm not super familiar with this Taoist philosophy, so I won't get into it a lot, but what I do want to say is with this coming down the mountain theory, it starts with the Hun and the Shen, and that's where I want to begin, with the most yang in nature, the most, well, if you're not familiar with the yin and yang theory, I will link in the show notes a couple of episodes where I get deeper into it, but something that's yang or yang in nature is going to be more of the heavens, to keep it simple. And also, I feel like this goes without saying, but just in case anyone is unfamiliar with Chinese medicine, when it comes to the full aspect of a human and the human experience, so consciousness, the spirit, the mind, the body, emotions, none of it is separate. So when I talk about these spirits and I talk about the emotions, and just understand that this is a way of categorizing and systematizing and labeling aspects that are unseen but very much felt in the human experience. So when it comes to the things that are felt and unseen, words tend to dilute it, and making them separate can sometimes cause confusion, because all of these spirits, they all work in tandem, and there's so many different philosophies. So take everything I have to say with a grain of salt. Listen to your heart. You can create and combine and create your own definitions. This is just based off of my research, my education, and a big, huge thank you to Stephanie Nosko, who is a wealth of knowledge on this topic. So to start with our first aspect of the spirit of the fire element, which is the Shen. The Shen is seen as, or described as, like a little bird, bringing the light of the heaven down the mountain. And as we descend, it alchemizes all of our life experiences into facets of growth, expansion, and evolution. So the gifts of the Shen are intuition, presence, and connection to ultimate truth. If you've listened to, actually, I'll link in the show notes. I had, towards the end of the episode, I had like this really beautiful tangent on what is the heart? What is the heart in Chinese medicine and in my life? And it was through a journey with Iboga, a very potent plant sacrament from Africa, that I really just came to learn like the true wisdom, like what is really in the seat of the heart. And it's the true self. So not the self that is you, that has your characteristics and your name, is your accolades and all the experiences and the stories. Like your story is so wonderful. And also it is not the true you. The true you is the observing soul, the observing aspect of the soul behind your eyes. I like to call it the eye behind the eyes. And one of my favorite quotes, one of my favorite reminders is one heart sees better than two eyes. And to me, this is the most important of all the spirits, because when you can learn the whispers of your heart, then you'll never, ever, ever go wrong. You'll never be steered wrong by your heart. And if you choose not to follow your heart, it will still live inside of your chest, and it'll still talk to you and tell you everything it sees in the world. We often say that the spirit of the Shen is what takes in the world around you and creates a perspective. So while it is the observing soul, the ultimate truth, it helps you create this egoistic perspective of the world to help you make sense of it. The Shen is the center of it all. It's the emperor. It sets the tone for the entire kingdom. Because we give different, titles to different aspects. The Chinese love like government systems. So yeah, the Shen is called the emperor. So again, the Shen has to do with consciousness, awareness, mental clarity, sleep. It is the seat of our emotions. As I mentioned before, the spirits, they all have their own emotion going on, but truly when I'm working with somebody who's emotionally disturbed, whether that's repressed emotions, overexpression of emotions, looping, whatever that emotion may be, there's always going to be an aspect of the Shen. If someone's experiencing insomnia, there's always going to be an aspect of the Shen. The heart mind is also known as the Shen. It integrates all spiritual activity. Again, the monarch of the spirits. So what does that mean? The heart mind, I think of the Heart Math Institute. I think of how there are so many research studies done on just the neurophysiological intelligence and capabilities of the heart. It's the aspect of our consciousness that feels and knows before our mind creates the story. It always has to be filtered through the heart mind. If you want to look more into that whole concept of like the science around the mind, definitely highly recommend that you look into the Heart Math Institute. So when there is a disturbance of the Shen, one would experience anxiety, as I mentioned before, insomnia. I'm going to link in the show notes an episode I did on sleep recently. If you want to go more into the Shen's role within sleep, there can be delirium in a lot of cases. Again, like a fracturing of reality, a fracturing of perspective, a mania or overexcitement, disconnectedness or disassociation. Sometimes I don't love the word hysteria, but I'm going to use it, hysteria. Speech issues. The heart channel has a strong influence. Well, it runs through the tongue. So it has a really strong influence on speech, as well as memory problems. So the emotion of the heart, while it is all emotions, the one that really stands out the most is joy. And this brings me into a really interesting conversation about the dualities of joy. So on one side of joy, I think the most grounded aspect of it is gratitude. just deep gratitude for everything that there is. When you are in gratitude, it is hard not to feel joyful about every aspect of life, whether that is the gifts or the challenges, because when you can see the challenges for what they are and feel the gratitude within them, you're just like, I mean, I've had moments where I've been almost giddy, like literally in laughter, because I'm like, holy shit, there's that thing coming up right again. Here's a place where I can become free. And I think that is also another aspect here of this duality of joy. When there's like a pure gratitude, a pure joy, it is pure freedom. But then there's this other aspect of joy where it's like this cheap dopamine, these cheap thrills. There's restlessness of like, I gotta have more. They're just like that dopamine addiction that is so pervasive in our society. So I wouldn't necessarily call this true joy, but it definitely gives us, or maybe lasting joy. So looking at the cheap dopamine systems of our society, it's the social media, it's all the branding, all the sex, how sex sells, and the attraction to things, and to get that little hit. How do we pull them in? How do we keep them in? But yet, as many of us know, when we stay in that loop of that duality of joy, we grow anxious. We lose sleep. We become disconnected and disassociated. So it's a very interesting balance here that we have to be aware of knowing too, like the little bird. Think of how little birds are twittering and tweeting all around. They're pulled in by so many outside influences. And when there's too much going on, then the bird, the twittering becomes incessant and it can fucking drive you nuts. Another aspect of joy that we can discuss here is excitement and shock. So too much joy. So looking at the two dualities, or rather the end of the duality that can create disbalance, the cheap dopamine as well as shock, what they do in the body is they scatter chi. They scatter our awareness, and it destabilizes our energetic bodies. There's so much more I can get into about this, but for the sake of time, I'm going to leave that here. I also want to mention that the spirit point to access right there, to access through the spirit of the Shen, is a point on the back that is aligned with our fifth thoracic vertebra, and it's called the Hall of the Spirit. So if there's just like, without a doubt in my mind, someone's having something, especially chronic with the Shen, I would go straight to that point. I would maybe do moxa over it, depending on what they need. So moxibustion or cupping or needling, or maybe just massage over that area. Before we finish with the Shen, I do want to say that there's duality within all things, correct? So there's this deathless awareness, aka like the truth of who we truly are within the Shen. And then there's like that rest of the spirit, the personality itself. And why that feels worth mentioning is because, again, I say duality, but in truth, the two of them are not separate. They cannot exist without the other. We are a spirit of pure deathless awareness and pure truth who came down to experience the personality and the self. So if you ostracize one or the other, there's going to be a fracturing of the spirit. And I believe a lot of mental illness, especially mental illness that is not easily treated by nutrition, which is a really fascinating and valuable, in my opinion, necessary deep dive to do to understand what may be happening in your body. Like, for example, if zinc is too low in the body, which is an essential mineral, then copper can get high, and then that can actually induce emotional turmoil. There's so many things that you can look into before you actually go into like the route of psychiatrics or psychology even. Just start with nutrition in mental illness when helping yourself, or if you're a practitioner here, there's a lot you can do before you get into other sides of treatment. Mental illness will not be easily treated or will not be addressed solely by medication. There has to be an aspect of introspection here. Medication is just going to be a blanket. And I don't think that there is no place for psychological meds, drugs here. I mean, shit, like I can't tell you, I feel like it's the constant battle of someone like me who is in deep reverence and practice of the world of plant sacraments, of plant medicine, and then people who are on the outside, they call it drugs. And at first I'd be like, it's not fucking drugs, but like it is. If you want to like just simplify and reduce everything down, it's drugs. So like while I think that there is a time and place for psychedelics, for plant sacraments, for psychiatric meds, they are not enough to quote unquote heal the spirit. The spirit doesn't need to be healed. It just needs to remember. And those are just temporary methods to help you get to a place of seeing yourself for who you truly are, which is both sides. So there has to be a willingness within our spiritual practice to see ourselves without substances, to wake up and to grow up. And to give you the simplest of tools, the simplest of practices that you can engage in to step into the space of the Shen is to close your eyes. The Shen manifests in the eyes. Actually, shoot. There's so many things. There's so many things on the Shen. I'm like, all right, I got to get to the Hun. But the last thing I will say is the last of many things. So the Shen manifests in the eyes. So they say, you know, the eyes are the spirit, the gate to the spirit, the gate to the soul. It's the truth. So something that I often do in my practice is I will look someone deep in the eyes to have a gauge of where their Shen is at. And a classic characteristic of the Shen, where there is a fracturing of the spirit, there is the Shen disturbance, that's what we call it. The Shen disturbance is something called senpaku eyes. I will link in the show notes. I'll look for a blog post that can talk a little bit more about senpaku eyes. But if you look at a classic person who is not Shen disturbed, there's no fracture in the spirit here. The top and the bottom of their iris will touch their eyelids if they're looking straight ahead. But when the iris doesn't touch, there's a little bit of a separation between the eyelids and the iris, then there's a disturbance there. The more separation there is, if you look at a character like Charles Manson, he's the classic example of senpaku eyes. There is a large separation between the eyes here. But there can be mild separations, and that can be like mild anxiety, mild depression. Actually, it's interesting because Billie Eilish is actually a classic example when I look up senpaku eyes. So I don't know what's going on with your girl Billie. I'd have to look at her tongue to get a full confirmation here. But she is also, according to the internet, a classic example. I don't know how deep she is in it, but maybe she's just got like mild anxiety and depression here. So closing the eyes allows the Shen to leave the eyes and to drop into the heart. So to no longer have to take on its role of taking out the outside world in, and it settles into the home, the seat of the soul, which is the heart. All right, moving on. And also, just to give you a warning, this might have to be a 2-part series. We're going to find out real soon. Okay, diving into the Hun. So the Hun is actually the spirit of the wood element. The organ involved is the liver here. So something that's kind of interesting is, if you look at the 5-element theory chart, the wood element points towards the heart element. So it generates the heart element here. Or the fire element. So if you think about it, you know, you put the wood in the fire, and then that's how fire is created. It consumes the wood. So if there's too much wood, then there's no space for the fire to breathe, and it can actually snuff the fire out. If there's not enough wood, then the fire has nothing to work off of. So the Hun here is the spirit of our dreams, our vision, our creativity, our imagination, our inspiration. It gives us direction and a sense of purpose in our lives. So if we looking at this relationship here, the Shen could not exist without this aspect of our spirit that is just pure imagination. And it is the aspect of the spirit that has been snuffed out within our school systems and our society. There's no appreciation in a classic capitalistic society for imagination. It's something that's seen as almost like frivolous, like, oh, only like the spiritual people who do inner child work can have the time to engage in imagination and play. And I think that's why children are so important to have in our lives, because they are pure Hun spirits. They are pure imagination and play, and they have their whole lives ahead of them. There's nothing but this just dreaminess, and they're so full of creativity here. So if you want to get in touch with your Hun, go play with a little kid. Go let them lead the way too in terms of their games. And if you have no idea what you're doing, like, again, let them lead the way here. All right, so the Hun also has the capacity to leave our body when we're dreaming or to shift in consciousness. So when you're in meditation, if we're practicing astral projection, those are also times when the Hun can leave the body. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, something that's really classic that I see in people, especially very spiritual people, is there a lack of anchoring within the Hun. So an anchoring to reality, but also our food plays such an important role. So having proper like nourishment can play such an important role in anchoring the Shen and the Hun, helping it come down the mountain, which will bring me to the Yi, the next aspect of the spirit, but staying with the Hun. So when there's a disturbance of the Hun spirit, there's a lack of vision. So it's this sensation of feeling stuck, feeling like life has no direction, creative blocks, nightmares or unsettled dreams, and sometimes mood swings, especially towards anger and frustration. So while the Shen is that light behind our eyes, the Hun also has a strong aspect of the eyes. It's more of that aspect of the eyes that takes in color and texture and detail. It informs the rest of the body of what's happening in our environment. And I believe because of the Hun, there is an appreciation for the little things. I think women are really wonderful at this, of this detail orientation and this appreciation for like the color of one's lipstick or the texture of a really warm and soft blanket. To me, personally, that is an aspect of the Hun. So a classic diagnosis in Chinese medicine where there's a Hun disturbance is qi stagnation. So again, like feeling stuck and feeling like you have no direction. They're usually walking around like that. You'll hear that sound in them. And the way I talk about this all the time in the show, the way to reverse that stuck, I think of like you're trying to chop wood but you're not getting through, is a loud and long sigh. Really just bringing your tone from high to low is really important. I actually think about when mothers give birth, how it's so important for them to have a lower tone. And when they're like that, it brings them out of their body. And when you can bring it in, it brings the spirit back to the body. And it also helps the mother engage in the journey. Sometimes mothers will report like they'll have this whole psychedelic journey within their birth of bringing their baby's soul earthside. Again, bringing the spirit down the mountain. So the emotion of the Hun is anger and frustration on one end and hope on the other. Actually, the exit point and final point of the liver channel is called liver 14, the gate of hope. So anger and frustration, the energetic movement. So as I mentioned that for the Shen, extreme joy or shock can scatter chi. So anger will cause chi to rise. So somebody who's often struggling with headaches, red eyes, blurry vision, dry, itchy eyes, feeling overheated, issues with the hair on their head, whether it's thinning of hair, falling out, hair loss, all those things. Even I would say the scalp, there's going to be some sort of aspect, like the upper aspects of the body, there's going to be some influence of anger, whether it is overexpressed or I don't know if there's any such thing as overexpression, maybe like a looping, a holding on too tightly to anger, as well as a repression of anger. Your girl right here has been a classic example over my life of repressed anger. And some of the symptoms that I experienced were acid reflux. I couldn't think clearly. I could not for the life of me know what I even wanted for myself and what I wanted from my life. And it wasn't until I engaged in these meditations called dynamic meditations where I expressed my anger. I thought I was just going to cry during these, like, they're very emotional, physical. I'll link in the show notes. I have a lot of links for you, a lot of episodes for you to the show notes here. But yeah, when I finally engaged in expressing my anger, I was able to finally think clearly, and then I fucking went into Chinese medicine. So all the reason to tap into your anger and your rage. It is so sacred. It is not a block. It is a tool to help you move forward. So hope on the other side of this duality of the emotions of the Hun. So hope challenges you to stay open, to stay aware. So I felt like awareness is a really important word to use here because sometimes hope can be delusional. And there's sometimes nothing wrong with being delusional, but I would say the dysfunctional side of hope, of the Hun, of the imagination could be fantasizing. So making up a story and that deludes you from seeing what's right in front of you. So I'm talking more about the hope where you are well aware of what's happening right in front of your very eyes, but there's like this knowing that it doesn't stay the same. The good, the quote unquote good and bad, it never stays stagnant. So it's like there's this hope for growth and expansion, and that is a huge aspect of the wood element here. They usually use bamboo as an example, and if you're familiar with bamboo grows like crazy. It is always moving and expanding here. So when one is in a state of hopelessness, it usually leads to depression because you're stuck. You can't see what's ahead of you. You can't believe, you have no hope that it'll ever change. And it's this belief that, like, I feel like what really gets people into the loop of depression is believing that there's something wrong with them and it's going to stay this way forever because they're fucked up and they're damaged. And that's just, it's only true if you truly believe it. So the wood element is a wonderful element for my friends here who are stuck in that loop and feeling hopeless and lacking in imagination. So the character of the Hun is the green dragon. So the green dragon, it carries magic in like this upward force towards new life. Again, very yang in nature. Yang is always moving and growing and expanding, and it represents our capacity to hope and envision new beginnings. So if you're in a state of depression, if you're somebody who falls into that, the green dragon is an incredible ally to play around with here. So you would call upon your inner dragon during times of hopelessness or when you lose sight of new possibilities. I can't help but think about our society right now. I mean, shit could look pretty fucking bleak if you're looking at it from one perspective here, or a few choice perspectives here. If you're, really looking at it from a global scale, if you are somebody who watches the news and looks at everything that's happening, oh my God, it's so hard not to feel hopeless within humanity. And we're in a time in our society where there is this obsession with dragons here. I am such a dragon freak. I'm writing a book right now where there's this dragon, Seculum, who is like a huge driving force. Like if I'm not even working on the book, if I'm on a walk, I went on a walk yesterday, and Seculum, this dragon, she's this like all omniscient, ancient sort of character. I close my eyes and I see her eyes staring at me. And this character, my inner dragon, is always calling me back to the spirit of creation, and having the courage to put down what's in my mind. I don't know about you guys, but like I have to work with a lot of cringe energy when I really allow that spirit, the hun, to really flourish and express itself. There's something in the back of my memory or my imprinting here that like wants me to cringe and to contract against that expansive expression. And I feel like my inner dragon is always pushing me forward to do it anyways. Saeculum, it's the Latin word for age or generation. So it refers to like a long period of time, like human lifetimes. So, this saeculum that we're in, this generation that we're in, could use a lot of fucking hope. That's what I'm basically trying to say. So access your inner dragon. And it also represents fierce compassion. So it is our ability to see what's going on and to feel this, like to allow our heart to open, to bleed a little bit, and to have a hope that it won't always stay this way, this deep knowing that also like it's a game, right? So it's a symbol of tamed anger and true strength and harnessed rage and how to redirect it. So it is our ability to confront injustice and stand up for our beliefs and our values and make an impact without getting sucked into righteousness. Because I believe that righteousness can breed violence. That's a whole other tangent I could get into at another time though. So Kuan Yin, if you're familiar with Kuan Yin, she's a saint, an enlightened being. She's often seen riding a green dragon. Last few things I'll say about the hun here is that its color is green. Being outside, being in that 0 point frequency of nature, being around green things is a really great way to reset your hun. And again, like let's engage in the aspects of the Shen. Get outside, look at some green, then close your eyes and let your Shen settling within your heart and the seat of your imagination, which like, what even is our imagination? I had this incredible experience recently in Africa where I came to learn that yes, my imagination sits within my heart, but what is truly behind the heart, it's all of these dimensions of possibility exists right there. So, and then the season of the hun is spring, hope, right? Growth, expansion. All right, let's get into our next spirit. The spirit of the earth element, which is the yi or the yi. I'll probably just jump between saying the two here. So the yi is all about thinking, studying, memory, concentration, discernment, forming intention and manifesting ideas, learning and reflection. So we have these two ethereal souls that are all about like, what's possible? What can we create? And the yi is putting the rubber to the road. It is probably the least sexy of the spirits because it's all about chopping the wood and carrying the water. So that's a Zen Buddhist proverb that refers to what it takes to reach the top of the mountain, to reach that quote unquote enlightenment. And it's through the mundane tasks of life and bringing the spirits, the imagination, our ideas into reality. There's a quote that Stephanie Nosko refers to that one of her teachers often says, which is once is never. So basically it's dedication, being dedicated to your craft, like saying, I want to write a book, and you sit down and you write the first few pages and then you never go back to it. Once is never. So some characteristics of when the yi is disturbed: there's overthinking, worry, inability to focus, the mind just constantly wandering, poor digestion of thoughts and ideas, but also like literally your digestive system. As I mentioned earlier, a really important aspect of the ethereal spirits being ungrounded is improper nutrition. So it's through the yi that we can ground those things, right? And bring them to reality. We also have immobilizing self-doubt and the inability to follow through on plans. I think a really common sort of first step symptom of the yi being drawn into turmoil is feeling like this fogginess, like can't really, like I mean, if you've experienced the fog, it kind of feels like there's a monkey on your back. You kind of just feel like you're existing through the day. It's hard to really have a direction of what you want, and it's just life is happening to you. The season for the yi is the late summer season. So that last season of abundance, I think of, I see gardens in my mind of trees that are heavy with fruit and vines that are tumbling. Everything's just so full of life and ready for that harvest. And actually, I realized that I didn't mention the spirit of the heart, which is summertime. So it's that movement out of spring into like this steady light and fire and joyous time in life. Who doesn't love summer? But you see, so yeah, there in Chinese medicine, there's a distinction here between summer and late summer. And if you're in Florida, then you would understand that late summer, it's hurricane season, it's monsoon season here for us, which is totally relevant to the earth element in aspects that I just don't have time to get into right now. The emotions of the yi are, well, here we go with the duality: worry and trust. And so let's get really basic here, because the spirit of the yi is so basic. The character that is used for the yi is like the humble farmer, like the humble ant. So basic. If your basic needs are not being met, so food and proper nourishment, basic safety within your environment, then there's going to be a fracturing here within all the spirits. Because I said the Shen is the most important. I'm wondering if maybe it's the yi that's the most important, just considering what we as souls came here for. And of course, that's if you like ascribe to my worldview here, which is that we are souls on an ever evolutionary path. So not having basic needs met can create worry, but also worry can also create an environment where you're unable to have your basic needs met. When you're living just too much in your mind and you're overthinking and you're not living. So many people, they live in their minds and their body suffers because of it. So worry knots chi. A physiological example where you may be experiencing this would be, we call it plum pit chi. You feel like this knot of chi. Maybe it's in your throat, maybe it's in your stomach. Those are the two classic places that you would feel that knotting sensation of your life force. So looking at trust, our scaffolding for our experience of trust, it begins with our caretakers. It begins often with our mothers and her whole experience of birth, really. So it also creates this scaffolding of intimacy for the rest of our lives and our relationships. So when we're young, we don't really have any capacity for putting words to our experience, and really, the condition here is ignorance. So what we do is we put God in our caretaker, our primary caretaker here. And so when our caretakers are unable to provide us with the care that we need in order to survive or even to thrive, then there becomes this deep distrust in not just others, but in God, source, universe, life itself, which in turn, as the mirror, a deep distrust within ourselves. So when I see somebody, and it's often very unconscious, this deep distrust, but when I see somebody struggling to trust that life is happening for them rather than to them, or of course, like digestive issues or brain fog, or if they're looping on blaming their parents or caretakers for their issues as an adult. There's so many aspects. There is going to be this aspect of the E that I'll want to nourish. So like treatment protocol here, I would probably, well, there's a lot of protocols I could do for that. But if we're on the topic of the spirit points on the body here, I would access the Shen point of the spine around T5, as I mentioned earlier. And then I would go down the spine to the 11th thoracic vertebrae to needle the spirit point of the, which is called Isha, or abode of thought. And I'll probably have a conversation with them about how it begins with ourselves. Trusting yourself is the center of it all. How can you trust others when you haven't built a relationship of trust within yourself? And man, that's a whole journey that I've had to go through within myself. Like I really struggle with digestion throughout my life. Now I'm like, we're all good, but it was through the journey of learning, one, that I deeply distrusted myself, did not realize that, and two, learning all the little things that it takes to learn how to trust myself, which triggers a memory one day when I was meditating. It was actually right before I was going to go to Peru to do a 10-day soma or dieta of isolation in the jungle. And I was so afraid, and I was like, please, guides, God, whoever's out there listening, I'm so afraid. I feel so unsafe. Can you please? And truly, it wasn't because of this trip. I just felt very unsafe in my body. So I was just asking for safety. And you know what the response I got was, is the remedy to feeling unsafe isn't safety. Safety is an illusion. And I remember thinking, well, fuck me. Thanks, I guess. But then what I heard behind that was the remedy to feeling unsafe is trust. And so what does it take? It's chopping the wood, carrying the water. It's showing up for yourself every single time. The Yi is the spirit of devotion. So we have the farmer and harvest in devotion to the action, not necessarily caught up in the results of the action. It's like this trust that if I work the fields, I wake up every morning, I nourish, I harvest, I wake up every single day and I show up in the field, then it's going to come to fruition. It's the combination of thought and intention that creates action. So if we're unclear, there's like this analysis paralysis and this cognitive dissonance. And which gets me to this this question that I had asked my friend Troy within an iboga ceremony once, and it was my mind just going nuts, just reeling. And he came up to me, he's like, "How you doing?" And I go, "Does it ever stop?" And he goes, "Does whatever stop?" I'm like, "The mind, the thinking." And he said, "Well, just like the heart will always beat inside of your chest as long as you're alive. Your heart will always beat, whether you are conscious or unconscious of it. I mean, ideally, you're unconscious of the heartbeat, or else you'll go fucking nuts. But it'll never stop. The stomach will never stop turning and moving food. So the mind, you don't want it to necessarily stop doing what it's made for. You are not in dysfunction because your mind is thinking and judging. Don't judge the judge. Don't stop the thinking per se. It's more like stop taking it so seriously. Stop living within the mind. Stop letting the mind be the master of your reality, because you have so many other aspects of the spirit. And it kind of brings me to this point of like how our society is set up. It's not at the best place to be if you want to nourish your earth element. There's so much encouragement to let the mind be the master and let your opinions and perspectives be like the driving force of how you relate to others and how you move forward. Like hold your opinions very lightly. Everyone's got one, and they're allowed to change in any moment. In fact, we should encourage the changing and the shifting of opinions because that's growth. We're not here to be right? We're here to evolve. I think a lot of people, this is where they tend to get stuck. There's like this inability to expand further past that, to move through the fog and to work with the thinking thoughts. Look at them as a tool towards your expansion. Again, it's like this opportunity for freedom or this opportunity to stay stuck. It's entirely up to you. And that E is that really special pivot point. So the last thing I'll touch on here is the character of the Yi. I mentioned as the farmer and the ant, but truly it's the phoenix. So the phoenix soars to the heavens and also goes down to the underworld, right? Like fire and ash. And it's the key to transformation. Actually, it's funny because I'm seeing how the five spirits play such a role. I mean, Chinese medicine's riddled within my entire book that I'm writing, but this first book of this 3-part series that's just like racing through my mind constantly, that I'm like writing down furiously when I have the chance, is the first book is Fire and Ash. We have to, and in the book is kind of about the path towards, it's called Shadow Dancers. So it's the path towards remembering and wholeness and accessing the true self within. And in order to access that space, you have to allow yourself to burn. And here's the phoenix. So it's usually depicted as multicolored, and it represents the 5 virtues within Taoism. So benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and fidelity, as well as the 5 elements. So why this is all worth mentioning, because they all come alive through the E spirit. And so, my friend, this is where I am actually going to leave you. I don't have the time, unfortunately. I got a lot going on right now. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. Officially, of the 5 spirits of Chinese medicine. So we got the first 3 down, and then next time we come together, we will talk about the Po and the Chur, which is perfect because I have a lot of research that I want to get into for the Chur because I think it's very important. But these are the aspects of the spirit that are of the body, that are of the underworld. The Po is where our shadow self lives. These are the 2 aspects of the spirit that when we die, they're like our legacy within the earth. So if you want to learn more about those from my mouth to your ears, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. It might come in the next 2 weeks or it might come in the next month. I got to figure out what's going to work best for me here. I got some travel. I got yet another bachelorette party to go to this weekend. So I am so grateful that you're here and you're open to learning these sort of ideas and concepts. If you want to talk about it, reach out. As you can tell, I love these conversations. I live for it. I want to know, what are your thoughts? I love getting feedback on the podcast here. Like, what sort of thoughts and ideas is this triggering you? What do these spirits, the Shen, the Hun, and the Yi, what do they mean to you? You can find all my information in the show notes. If you want to work with me, you can find my information in the show notes as well. If you want to show your support, make sure to leave a rating, a review, and to share it with a friend. All right, I'll be feeling your energy in the near future.